He grabbed her coffee cup and poured it directly onto her uniform. Cold, deliberate, in front of every officer in the lounge. Commander Jack Reynolds set the empty cup down and stared at her like she was nothing. Like she had always been nothing. Like 30 witnesses made it more satisfying, not less acceptable. Maya Collins didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for the coffee spreading across her uniform. She just looked at him. And that look, steady, absolute, completely without fear, made every person in that room suddenly unsure which one of them was actually in danger. Nobody knew what was buried inside that woman's file. Not yet. If this story moves something in you, subscribe to our channel and follow Maya all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. She arrived on a Tuesday. No advance notice. No formal introduction at morning formation. No base-wide announcement about the new transfer. One day the desk in the secondary intelligence wing was empty, and the next day it wasn't. Her name badge said Lieutenant Maya Collins. Operations Coordination. That was it. No combat ribbons on her chest. No deployment patches on her sleeve that anyone recognized. Her uniform was pressed but plain, and the rank she wore was the kind that made people's eyes slide right past it. Senior enough to not be ignored in a hallway. Junior enough to not demand a room's attention. She carried a single standard-issue bag to her quarters, and a leather-bound notebook that she kept closed. Petty Officer Second Class, Darnell Briggs, who handled base orientation for incoming transfers, walked her through the wing and gave her the usual briefing. Fire exits. Mess hall hours. Communications protocol. The kind of thing he did 12 times a month without thinking about it. Halfway through, he stopped and looked at her. She was watching him with complete, unhurried attention. Not the polite nodding that most newcomers performed while mentally cataloging their bunk assignments. She was actually listening not just to the words, but to the pauses between them. It made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't explain. "Any questions, Lieutenant?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "The communication logs for the last 90 days, are they stored on the central server or in wing-specific drives?" He blinked. That would be an IT question, ma'am." "I'll find the right person," she said. "Thank you, Petty Officer." She walked into her office, closed the door, and Darnell Briggs stood alone in the hallway for a moment, feeling like he'd just been studied without realizing it. Her first week passed quietly. Too quietly, according to Chief Petty Officer Vanessa Okafor, who ran the administrative hub of the intelligence wing, and had developed a finely tuned instinct for the two types of people who came through. The first type made noise. They arrived with opinions and energy and a need to immediately demonstrate their value by identifying everything that was broken and loudly proposing fixes. Most of them were smart enough. Most of them also created more disruption than improvement within the first 30 days, and then slowly went quiet. The second type also made noise, the noise of confusion. They asked too many basic questions. They lost documents in systems they didn't understand. They scheduled meetings about meetings and produced reports summarizing other reports. Maya Collins made no noise whatsoever. She arrived at her desk at 0600 every morning. She was there when Okafor arrived at 0630 and still there when Okafor left at 1900. She ate lunch at her desk. She spoke when spoken to and answered questions with precision and without additional commentary. "She's either the most disciplined officer I've seen in 2 years," Okafor told the base's logistics coordinator, Senior Chief Harold Fenn, over coffee on day 4. "Or she's waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Harold asked. Okafor shook her head. "That's what makes me nervous. I can't tell." What Maya was doing in those first quiet days was reading. Not the documents she'd been formally assigned. Those she processed efficiently and correctly, finishing well ahead of any expected timeline. What she read in the hours between was everything else. The base's operational logs going back 8 months. The supply chain records for the 3 most recent training cycles, the maintenance reports, the communication routing files, the personnel scheduling data. She read with the same focused, unhurried attention she'd given Petty Officer Briggs during his orientation speech. And by day 3, she had already found 3 things that didn't add up. The first was a supply discrepancy. A requisition for specialized communications equipment, 4 encrypted radio units, model designation CR7 had been filed in February, approved in March, and listed as received in April. But the equipment wasn't in the inventory. It wasn't on the operational floor. It wasn't in storage. It wasn't checked out to any active unit. It simply appeared in the received column of one document and then vanished from every other record that should logically have followed. 4 units, not a rounding error. Maya noted the requisition number, the approval signature, and the receiving date, and moved on without flagging it. Not yet. The second thing was a communication gap. During a training rotation in late January, a coordinated exercise between the intelligence wing and the base's rapid response unit showed a 94-minute delay in real-time data relay, a gap wide enough to compromise any actual operation. The incident had been logged, reviewed, and closed with the notation, "Technical error resolved." But when Maya traced the communication routing from that day, she found no technical error. The relay systems had functioned exactly as they should have. The delay wasn't caused by the systems. It was caused by someone not using them when they were supposed to. She noted that too, said nothing. The third thing was more subtle. In the mission debrief reports for the last 4 major training exercises, there was a consistent pattern of performance assessment inflation. Units that had shown measurable deficiencies during live execution were described in the official after-action reports in terms that softened or entirely omitted those deficiencies. The language was careful and technically accurate, no outright lies. But the picture it painted was significantly different from what the raw performance data showed. Someone was writing reports that made things look better than they were. And whoever was signing those reports had a very consistent signature style. She closed the last file at 2200 hours on her 3rd night and sat for a long moment in the empty office. Then she opened her leather-bound notebook and began writing. By the end of her first week, she had quietly restructured the operational tracking system used by her wing. She hadn't asked permission. She hadn't sent a proposal. She'd simply spent 2 evenings building a parallel tracking framework that cross-referenced supply records against communications logs, against personnel scheduling, and integrated view that the existing system didn't create because the existing system had been designed to track each element in isolation. When Chief Petty Officer Okafor arrived on Monday morning and opened the wing's shared database, she stared at her screen for almost 3 full minutes. "Lieutenant Collins," she called across the room. "Chief Petty Officer. Did you do this?" "I made some organizational changes, yes. Without authorization." Maya looked at her steadily. "The changes are reversible if you'd prefer to remove them. I can have the original configuration restored in approximately 40 minutes. Okafor stared at her a moment longer. "Can you explain what I'm looking at?" Maya walked to her desk and spent 11 minutes explaining the new system, what it tracked, why the cross-referencing mattered, and 3 specific discrepancies it had already surfaced. When she finished, Okafor was quiet for a moment. "You built this in 2 evenings, Okafor said. "It wasn't a question. I had the evenings free." "You've been here 9 days." "Yes." Okafor looked at the screen again, looked back at Maya, looked at the screen. "I'm not restoring the original," she said finally. "I'll document the changes formally if you'd like a written record," Maya offered. "Do that," Okafor said. Then, as Maya turned back to her desk, "Collins." Maya stopped. "Where were you before this assignment?" A brief pause, brief enough to be almost nothing. "Administrative coordination," Maya said. "Various postings." And she returned to her desk. Okafor watched her go and felt again that sensation, like standing in front of a door and not being able to tell what was on the other side. Commander Jack Reynolds noticed the improved efficiency reports on day 11. He noticed them the way a man notices someone else taking up space. He considers his, not because the space is explicitly his, but because he has occupied it long enough that the absence of acknowledgement feels like a challenge. Reynolds had spent 22 years building his reputation at sea and ashore. His record was genuine, his deployments were real, his decorations were earned, and his understanding of how naval operations functioned was both deep and hard-won. He was not a stupid man, and not a dishonest one, not in the ways that mattered most. But he was a man who had built his identity around a specific idea of what military excellence looked like. It was loud and visible, and proven in conditions that most people would not survive. It wore its history openly. It announced itself. And everything about Maya Collins violated that framework. She was too quiet. Her improvements were too efficient. Her competence was too calm. She didn't carry herself like someone who was performing. She carried herself like someone who simply was, and found the distinction between performance and reality so obvious that she couldn't understand why anyone would confuse the two. That more than anything irritated Reynolds in ways he couldn't precisely articulate. He mentioned her to Lieutenant Commander Derek Holt, his second-in-command, during a routine briefing. "The Collins transfer," he said. "What's her background?" Holt pulled up her file. "Operations coordination. Previous postings at 3 different bases, Coronado, Pearl Harbor, and 1 classified rotation that's mostly redacted." "Classified rotation," Reynolds repeated. "Administrative role according to what's accessible. Paperwork's clean. No incidents, no commendations, nothing outstanding either way. And she just rebuilt half of the intelligence wing's tracking system in 2 weeks. Apparently." Reynolds studied the screen for a moment. "She didn't go through proper authorization channels. Chief Petty Officer Okafor retroactively approved the changes. The system improvements are measurable." "That's not the point." Holt said nothing. "The point," Reynolds continued, "is that officers who operate outside established protocol because they think they know better than the people who built those protocols are a problem. Doesn't matter if the immediate result looks good. The behavior pattern is the problem." Holt chose his words carefully. "She doesn't seem to have caused any disruption, sir." "Not yet," Reynolds said. And the way he said those 2 words made Holt look down at his notes and decide very deliberately that he did not want to be part of whatever was coming next. Reynolds began 3 days later. It was subtle at first. The way these things always were plausibly nothing individually. A question asked in a hallway with enough volume to draw nearby attention. A comment made during a briefing that wasn't directed at Maya specifically, but was positioned to reach her. He asked in front of 4 junior officers whether the new tracking system had been stress-tested against real operational conditions, or only against clean administrative scenarios. It was a legitimate question. It was also asked with a tone that framed the distinction as obvious and important, and something that someone with genuine operational experience would have thought of automatically. Maya's answer was direct and unhurried. "The framework's been tested against the data from the January training rotation and the March insertion exercise. Both generated conditions well outside clean administrative parameters. I'm happy to walk you through the validation methodology if you'd like." Reynolds studied her for a moment. "That won't be necessary." He walked away. The junior officers exchanged looks that Maya chose not to acknowledge. The second thing happened during a base-wide briefing on training cycle outcomes. Reynolds, speaking from the front of the room, made a comment about the difference between analysts who work with information and operators who work with reality, delivered with the particular confidence of a man who had never needed to be subtle, because subtlety had never been necessary for him to get what he wanted. The room was full enough that most people kept their eyes forward and their expressions neutral. Maya, seated 3 rows back and slightly to the left, wrote something in her notebook. After the briefing, Petty Officer Briggs fell into step beside her in the hallway. "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "Most people in that room knew what he was doing." "I know," Maya said. "Doesn't bother you." She considered the question with what seemed like genuine thought. "It tells me things," she said finally. "About him. About the situation." Briggs watched her walk away and had the distinct sense that he had just heard something important without quite understanding what it was. The third thing was not subtle at all. On the evening of the 14th day, Maya was sitting alone at a corner table in the officer lounge, working through a set of communications logs on a tablet, a half-finished cup of coffee beside her. The lounge had maybe 30 people in it, a cross-section of the base's officer corps, some on their first drink, some on their third. Reynolds came in with Holt and two other officers at 19:30. Maya registered their arrival without looking up. By 1945, she felt the shift in the room's attention, the way an experienced operator learns to feel things not through any single identifiable stimulus, but through the aggregated change in ambient sound, movement, and temperature. She looked up when Reynolds was already 2 steps away. He stopped at her table and looked down at her with an expression that was almost avuncular in its performance, the look of a senior officer giving a junior one the gift of his time and attention. "Lieutenant Collins," he said. "Commander, I hope you're finding the base to your satisfaction." Around them conversations didn't exactly stop, but they slowed. People didn't exactly stare, but they watched. The room made itself available for whatever was about to happen. "I am, sir," Maya said. "Thank you." Reynolds gestured loosely at her tablet, her coffee, her solitude. "You work late." "I work until the work is done." "That's admirable," he said in the tone that made admirable sound like something he was tolerating. "In my experience, though, there's a kind of work that looks very thorough from the inside and doesn't actually mean much when conditions get real." Maya said nothing. "I've had people come through this base who were exceptional at managing systems," Reynolds continued. "Clean data, efficient reports, everything organized and cross-referenced. Impressive on paper." He paused. But when the moment actually came, when there was pressure, when there were lives in the equation, when the work stopped being about information and started being about reality, they weren't built for it. They were built for the clean version, not the real one. The room was quiet now in the particular way that required effort to maintain the studied indifference of people working very hard to appear uninvolved. Maya set down her tablet. "I bring whatever the mission requires," she said. Something in Reynolds' expression shifted. Not dramatically. A small recalibration, the kind that happens when a person says something that doesn't fit the role you've assigned them, and you have to decide very quickly whether to acknowledge that or press forward anyway. He pressed forward. "Confidence is easy," he said, "when nobody's shooting at you." And then he reached out, picked up her coffee cup, and poured what remained of it across the front of her uniform. It wasn't a full cup. Maybe a third remained. But a third of a cup of cold coffee moving from a cup to a uniform in front of 30 people accomplished exactly what Reynolds intended it to accomplish, which was to create a moment that could only end one of two ways. Either she reacted, or she didn't. And either way, he had defined the terms. The coffee spread across the front of her uniform. Cold. Dark. Maya looked down at it. Nobody in the room breathed. For 3 seconds, and every person in that lounge later remembered exactly how long those 3 seconds were. Maya Collins said nothing, did nothing, moved in no identifiable direction. Then she reached to the side of her tablet case, removed a folded cloth, and methodically wiped the worst of it from her uniform. She set the cloth down. She looked up at Reynolds, and the expression on her face was not anger. It was not embarrassment. It was not the wounded containment of someone fighting to keep their composure. It was the face of someone who has just received a piece of information they expected. "Commander," she said, and her voice was absolutely level, "you just made a decision you don't fully understand yet." Reynolds' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is that a threat, Lieutenant?" "No, sir," she said. "It's an observation." She picked up her tablet. She stood. She nodded once at the room in general, not confrontationally, not pointedly. Just the acknowledgement of someone who has finished what she came to do, and she walked out. The door closed behind her. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Petty Officer Briggs, who had been standing near the back with his drink halfway to his mouth since Reynolds walked over, set it down on the nearest surface. "I've been on 4 bases," he said quietly to no one in particular. Nobody asked him what that meant. Nobody had to. In her quarters that night, Maya sat on the edge of her bunk and did not call anyone. She did not write anything in her notebook. She did not rehearse the evening or replay Reynolds' words or calculate what came next. She sat still for approximately 8 minutes. Then she set her alarm for 5:30, lay down, and went to sleep. This was the discipline that most people who had never been through what she had been through did not understand: the ability to separate the event from the response and to refuse to spend the energy of the response before the moment for it had actually arrived. Reynolds had shown her something tonight. Not something she hadn't expected. She had expected something like it since day 3, when she'd begun to understand the environment she was operating in. But he had shown her the shape of it, the degree of it, and the willingness behind it. That was information. And information, in Maya Collins's experience, was what separated the people who survived from the people who didn't. What she hadn't told anyone, what was buried in a section of her service record, marked with a classification level that most of the people on this base had never seen the designation for, was that Maya Collins had been operating in conditions of extreme pressure and deliberate isolation for long enough that an evening in an officer lounge with a petty territorial commander barely registered on the scale of things she had actually survived. She had been in rooms where the wrong expression at the wrong moment meant you didn't leave the room. She had maintained cover identities in environments where the people around her were actively trying to determine whether she was what she said she was, and where being determined to be otherwise had a very clear and irreversible consequence. She had made decisions under conditions of incomplete information, genuine danger, and absolute solitude, where there was no one to consult and no protocol to fall back on, and where the only available resource was the judgment she had trained herself to develop over years of work that most people would never know happened. Reynolds had poured a cold drink on her uniform in front of 30 officers. Maya had faced worse before breakfast on postings, whose names were not in her accessible file in service of missions, whose outcomes shaped things that people at bases like this one depended on without knowing why. She had never needed Reynolds to know that. She had never needed anyone to know that. What she needed was to find out who had approved the disappearing communications equipment, who had introduced the deliberate delay in the January training relay, and who had been writing reports that made failures look like successes. Because those 3 threads she had already determined led back to the same place. And the person at the end of those threads was not acting alone. At 0600. The next morning, Maya arrived at her desk. Chief Petty Officer Okafor was already there, which meant she had come in early, which meant she had heard about the lounge. "Collins," she said. "Chief? Heard about last night. I assumed you would." Okafor studied her. "How are you?" "Fine," Maya said. "I need access to the base's classified authorization logs from February through April, specifically anything tied to equipment requisitions above a certain threshold." A pause. "That's not standard access for your clearance level." "I know," Maya said. "Which is why I'm asking you, not the system." Another pause. Longer. "Why?" Okafor asked. Maya looked at her directly. "Because 4 encrypted radio units disappeared between a receiving document and the inventory floor. And I want to know who authorized the receiving document." The silence in the room was of a different quality now. Okafor set down the folder she was holding. "When did you find this?" she asked. "Day 3. The expression on Okafor's face went through several things in quick succession. Surprise. Calculation. Something that might have been if Okafor had been the kind of person who permitted herself the indulgence fear. "You sat on this for 11 days. "I needed to understand the environment first," Maya said. "I needed to know who I could trust." Okafor looked at her for a long moment. "And do you?" she asked. "No." Maya's answer was simple. "I'm asking you for access," she said. And Okafor understood exactly what that meant. She walked to her terminal without another word, entered her credentials, and pulled up the authorization logs. The name on the February receiving authorization was not what Maya had expected. It was not a low-level officer covering a small theft. It was not an administrative error that had been papered over by someone acting alone and scared. The authorization signature belonged to Lieutenant Commander Derek Holt, Reynolds' own second-in-command. Maya stared at the screen for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "Can you pull the communications routing records from January 22nd, specifically the records showing who had administrative access to the relay override that morning?" Okafor pulled them up. The same signature appeared in the access log at 06:12 that morning, 94 minutes before the relay delay began. Maya didn't move for a long moment. "Chief Petty Officer," she said quietly. "Yes. I need you to understand something before we go any further." "Go ahead." "What we've just found is the beginning of something, not the end. And the people responsible for this have enough information about base protocols to know very quickly if an investigation has been opened through standard channels." Okafor's voice was very careful. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Maya said, "that we don't go through standard channels." The room was very quiet. "What's your background, Collins?" Okafor asked. Her voice had changed. Not suspicious, something else. Something that recognized instinctively that the woman beside her was not the person her file said she was. Maya looked at the authorization logs on the screen. "I'm an operations coordinator," she said. And for the first time since she arrived, Maya Collins smiled. It was small, brief, almost nothing. But it was the smile of someone who knew exactly where all the doors were, which ones were locked, and which ones she had already decided to open on her own terms, in her own time, when the moment was exactly right. The investigation had just become something else entirely. And the man who had poured coffee on her uniform was standing much closer to the center of it than he understood. The authorization logs stayed open on Okafor's screen for a long time after Maya stopped speaking. Neither of them moved. Neither of them reached to close the file. The name sitting in that February authorization field, Derek Holt, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds' own second, wasn't going anywhere, and pretending otherwise would have been the kind of willful blindness that both women, for entirely different reasons, had spent their careers learning to refuse. It was Okafor who finally spoke. "How confident are you?" she asked. "In what I've found or in what it means?" "Both." Maya turned from the screen. "The document trail is clean. The signatures are genuine. I've cross-referenced the authorization timestamps against Holt's access log for that day, and the pattern holds. He didn't make an error. He didn't delegate to someone who made an error. He authorized equipment that never reached inventory, and he had administrative access to the relay system 94 minutes before a delay that cost that January exercise its entire second phase." She paused. "I'm confident." Okafor sat back slowly. "And you've been carrying this since day 3. "I've been building it since day 3, Maya said. "Carrying implies it was a burden." Something crossed Okafor's face. Not quite admiration. Something more complicated than that. The expression of a person who has just realized the water they're standing in is significantly deeper than they thought. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Right now, nothing more than what you've already given me." Maya straightened. "I need you to behave exactly as you would on any other morning. Business as usual. No change in how you interact with Holt, with Reynolds, with anyone on the operational floor." "You're worried about triggering a response." "I'm worried about triggering the wrong response at the wrong time," Maya said. "There's a difference." Okafor studied her for a moment. "You sound like someone who's done this before." Maya picked up her notebook. "I sound like someone who's learned what happens when you move too fast." She returned to her desk. She opened the notebook. She began writing. And Okafor, watching her, made a decision that she would later describe to the people who eventually asked her about it as the best instinctive call of her career. She closed the authorization logs without printing them, cleared her browser history, and went back to her morning reports as though nothing had changed at all. Reynolds arrived at 07:30, looking exactly like a man who had done something the previous night and was waiting to see whether it had worked. Maya knew that look. She had seen versions of it in places far more dangerous than this one. The look of someone who had thrown something into the water and was watching the surface for ripples. I didn't come to her desk. He moved through the wing with his usual authority, spoke to 2 junior officers about training schedules, exchanged a word with Holt near the communications alcove, and was gone within 15 minutes. But in the moment he passed through her peripheral vision, Maya watched him without appearing to watch him. His stride was normal. His expression was controlled. But there was a quality to the way he moved this morning, a slight excess of deliberateness, that told her he was managing something internally. Not guilt. Reynolds wasn't the kind of man who moved through guilt quickly. More like calculation. The ongoing calculation of a person who has made a move and is continuously assessing whether it achieved what he intended. She wrote 3 words in her notebook. He's watching outcomes. Then she closed it and went back to the communications logs. What Reynolds was watching specifically was whether Maya Collins would file a complaint. That was the calculation he'd been running since the moment she walked out of the lounge the previous night. It was a calculation that said, if she files, I manage it. I have 22 years on this base, and she has 14 days. I have relationships with the base commander, with the IG's office liaison, with the 3 senior officers who were in that room last night. She has a quiet reputation and a coffee stain. The math isn't complicated. But if she doesn't file, if she says nothing and does nothing and simply absorbs it, then she's established herself as someone who can be managed. Someone who understands the hierarchy of informal power and has accepted her position within it. And that in Reynolds' understanding of how organizations worked was how things got settled. What he had not accounted for was a third possibility. That she wouldn't file, and she wouldn't absorb it, and she wasn't doing nothing. That she was doing something he hadn't thought to include in his calculation, because nothing in his experience had prepared him for it. By 0900, Petty Officer Briggs had found Maya in the secondary records room. He closed the door behind him, which was not something he typically did, and stood with his back against it in the manner of someone who is trying to figure out how to begin. "Lieutenant Collins," he said. "Petty Officer Briggs. I want to say something." "Go ahead." I was quiet for a moment. "Last night was wrong. What he did. I want you to know that the people in that room, most of them knew it was wrong." Maya looked at him. "I know they did." "And nobody said anything?" "No," she agreed. "They didn't." He looked like this bothered him more than he knew how to express. "I should have, Petty Officer." Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him cleanly. "What happened last night is mine to deal with, not yours, and I don't want you doing anything that puts you in a difficult position over it. I'm not worried about my position." "I am," she said simply. "So please trust me and stay clear of this for now." He looked at her for a long moment. "For now," he repeated with the emphasis of someone registering that those 2 words carried significant weight. "For now," she confirmed. He nodded once and left, and Maya turned back to the records she'd been pulling because the thread she'd found in Holt's authorization trail had just developed a second strand, and the second strand was significantly more alarming than the first. The equipment wasn't the whole story. She'd understood that since day 5 when she'd first begun to trace the downstream effect of those 4 missing encrypted radio units. 4 units was a specific number, not the kind of round figure that suggested someone skimming for personal profit. 4 was operational. 4 meant someone needed a specific capacity for a specific purpose and had found a way to acquire it that didn't run through channels anyone would review closely. The question was what that purpose was, by 1/100. Maya had pulled every training rotation record for the past 8 months and mapped the communications relay architecture against the scheduled exercise windows. It was painstaking work, the kind that required holding a large number of variables in mind simultaneously and recognizing which correlations were meaningful and which were noise. She had been trained to do exactly this. In environments where the cost of confusing noise for signal was not a failed efficiency report, the pattern once she found it was very clear. Every major training exercise for the past 8 months had included a window between 40 and 90 minutes in duration, during which the base's primary encrypted relay system was either degraded or operating on reduced capacity. The January delay was the most visible instance because it was the longest and had affected a high-profile exercise. But it wasn't the only one. It was just the one that had generated a written record. The others had been absorbed into the normal friction of operations. Equipment maintenance windows. Scheduled system updates. The kind of routine explanation that a busy base accepted without scrutiny, because there was always something being maintained or updated, and nobody had the bandwidth to cross-reference every logged interruption against every operational window. Unless you built a system that did exactly that. which Maya had built in her second week. She stared at the correlation chart on her screen for a long time. Then she opened a new file, locked it with her personal credentials, and began documenting what she'd found with the kind of precision that left no room for interpretation. At 1265, Derek Holt walked into the secondary records room. Maya didn't look up immediately. She finished the sentence she was writing, set her pen down, and then raised her eyes. He was alone. That was the first thing she registered. The second was that he hadn't knocked. Holt was a careful man. She had observed that much in 2 weeks. Careful in his speech, careful in his positioning, careful in the way he managed his relationship with Reynolds. He was the kind of second-in-command who made himself indispensable by making himself invisible. He was always exactly where he needed to be, and never anywhere that could be used against him, except right now, where he was standing in a doorway he hadn't knocked on. Alone, looking at her with an expression she immediately categorized and filed. Not hostile, not friendly either. Something in between the expression of a person who is making an assessment and hasn't finished making it. "Lieutenant Collins," he said. "Commander Holt. Mind if I close this? Depends on why you're closing it." "A beat. I wanted to talk to you privately." "About what?" He came in and closed the door and stayed close to it, not crowding her, but positioned between her and the exit in a way that might have been unconscious and might not have been. "I heard about last night," he said. "Most people have. I want you to know I had nothing to do with what happened in that lounge." Maya looked at him with a steady, measured attention. "I didn't say you did." "I know." He paused. "But I also want to know where your head is at, professionally." "My head is where it always is," she said. "On my work." "That's a careful answer. It's an accurate one." He was quiet for a moment. He was reading her the way a person reads something when they're not sure what language it's written in. "Reynolds has a particular way of testing people," he said finally. "It's not always graceful, but it's usually not personal." "Commander Holt," Maya said, and her voice was very even. "I don't need an explanation of Commander Reynolds' behavior." Something moved behind his eyes. "I'm not explaining it. I'm contextualizing it. There's very little difference from where I'm sitting." Another pause, longer this time. "You're not what your file says you are," Holt said. It came out flat and direct, different in quality from everything else he'd said. Like he'd been working up to it and had decided to simply drop it and watch where it landed. Maya held his gaze. "My file says I'm an operations coordinator. That's what I am. Your file says you were at Coronado for 18 months. I know people at Coronado. Nobody there remembers you." I kept a low profile. "Your file says your classified rotation was administrative." It was. "Administrative in what capacity?" "Classified," she said. The word landed in the room with the particular weight of something that is both an answer and the end of the conversation. Holt studied her for 3 full seconds. "I'm trying to figure out," he said slowly, "whether you're a problem. And I'm trying to finish my work," she said. "Was there something specific you needed, Commander?" He looked at her for another moment. Then he opened the door. "Be careful," he said in a tone that sat somewhere between professional courtesy and something considerably less comfortable. "I always am," Maya said. He left. She watched the door close. Then she reached for her notebook and wrote 4 words. "He knows something's wrong. Not about the equipment. Not about the relay logs. He knew something was wrong about her, about the fact that she was there, about what she might be looking for." Which meant one of 2 things. Either his conscience was producing the ambient anxiety of someone who has done something wrong and is suddenly aware that someone competent is nearby. Or he knew exactly who she was. Maya sat with that for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and added 3 more words. "Find out which." The afternoon brought the development she hadn't anticipated. At 1400, Admiral Thomas Walker's aide, a young lieutenant named Carver, who moved through the base with the careful efficiency of someone who understood that his function was to be invisible until he wasn't, appeared at the entrance to the intelligence wing and asked Chief Petty Officer Okafor for a word. Maya watched from her desk. She couldn't hear the exchange. What she could read was Okafor's posture and the way it changed during the conversation. A slight stiffening that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite concern, but was somewhere between them. After Carver left, Okafor crossed to Maya's desk. "Admiral Walker wants your efficiency reports," she said. "The ones you generated from the new tracking system, specifically the supply chain cross-referencing." Maya kept her expression neutral. Did his aide say why? Routine audit review, apparently. Okafor's tone made clear she found this approximately as convincing as Maya did. "He wants them by end of day." "I'll have them ready." Okafor lowered her voice. "Maya, Walker doesn't request routine things personally through his aide. He has a process for routine things. This isn't routine." "I know. Does that worry you?" Maya considered this with genuine honesty. "It tells me the visibility of what we found has expanded," she said. "Whether that's a problem depends on who Walker is and what he does with what he sees." "Walker is..." Okafor paused, choosing her words carefully. "Walker is a man who has built a 40-year career on knowing exactly which way the wind is blowing before everyone else does. He's not corrupt, but he's very political." "Political people are predictable," Maya said. "They respond to evidence. Or they respond to the path of least resistance." "That's the same thing," Maya said, "when the evidence is good enough." She returned to her screen and began compiling the reports for Walker. At 15:30, Reynolds came back through the wing. This time he stopped. He stood in front of Maya's desk with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has made a decision and is now executing it. "Collins," he said, "I need to speak with you." She looked up. "Sir?" "In my office." The wing was not empty. 4 other officers were present, all of whom suddenly found their own work very absorbing. Maya closed her laptop, stood, and followed him. Reynolds' office was the office of a man who had spent a long time in a specific place and intended to remain there. The memorabilia on the walls was genuine real deployments, real operations, real recognition from real people who had been in real danger together. Whatever else Reynolds was, he had not manufactured his history. He sat behind his desk. He did not offer her a seat, and she did not take one. "The incident last night," he said. "Yes, sir. I want to address it." She waited. "My behavior was unprofessional," he said. He said it the way a man says something that cost him a significant amount to produce, not fluidly, not easily, but with the grinding effort of someone who has decided that saying the thing is necessary and has committed to getting through it. It was a lapse in judgment, and it reflected poorly on my conduct as a commanding officer. Maya said nothing. "I'm not going to make excuses for it," he continued. "I'm going to tell you that it won't happen again." It was by the standards of powerful men acknowledging their failures, a relatively clean apology. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't explain or minimize. He stated what happened, characterized it accurately, and committed to a different future behavior. Maya recognized all of this. She also recognized what it wasn't. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't the beginning of a genuine reckoning. It was closure, his attempt to put a clean ending on an episode so that he could stop thinking about it. "I appreciate that, sir," she said. He looked at her with a sharpness that she'd noticed before, the sharpness of a man who is waiting for someone to give him a reason to be angry again. "That's it. You've said what needed to be said," she replied. "I don't have anything to add to it." His jaw tightened slightly. He had expected she realized either acceptance or resistance. Both of those he knew how to handle. This, the simple receiving of his statement without emotional transaction, was neither, and he didn't quite know what to do with it. "There's something else," he said. "Sir?" "I've been told you submitted supply chain reports to Admiral Walker's office." Maya looked at him steadily. "Chief Petty Officer Okafor received a request from the Admiral's aide. I fulfilled it. Through Okafor. Through the appropriate chain." "Walker didn't go through me," Reynolds said, and now there was an edge in his voice that hadn't been there during the apology. "I'm the commanding officer of this wing. Any request from the Admiral's office that involves my personnel should come through me." Commander, Maya said carefully. I received a request from a superior officer. I filled it. You should have come to me first. The timeline didn't allow for that. The timeline, he repeated with a disbelief that was just contained enough to stay professional. Lieutenant Carver indicated the Admiral wanted the reports by end of day. Reynolds stared at her. She could see him calculating the same calculation she'd watched him run all morning, except this time the variables had shifted and he was having trouble locating the new equilibrium. What's in those reports? He asked. And there it was. The real question. The one he'd been building toward since she walked in. Not the apology, not the procedural complaint about the Admiral's direct request. This. Maya looked at him. Supply chain cross-referencing, she said. The same framework that improved the wing's operational efficiency tracking. I can send you a copy if you'd like. I'd like, he said flatly. I'll have it to you within the hour. She turned to go. Collins? She stopped. What are you actually doing here? The question was different from Holt's version. Holt's question had been calculating, probing, looking for information to use. Reynolds' question was something rawer. It was the question of a man who has just noticed that the ground under him is less solid than he thought and can't identify why. Maya turned back. I'm doing my job, sir, she said. She held his gaze for exactly 1 beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then she left. She sent him the reports at 16:15. The version she sent was complete and accurate, every efficiency metric, every supply chain, cross-reference, every communication relay correlation, every piece of analysis except the authorization logs. Those she kept in her own locked files. Reynolds would see the problem. He would see the gaps in inventory, the relay timing anomalies. But without the authorization logs, he would not immediately see whose name was on them. She needed to understand something first. She needed to understand whether Reynolds was involved or whether he was a man standing close to a fire he didn't know was burning. At 1700, Admiral Walker's aide Carver appeared in the wing again. This time he came directly to Maya's desk. Admiral Walker would like to see you, he said quietly. Tomorrow morning, 0800. I'll be there, she said. After Carver left, Okafor appeared at her side. Walker summoning you directly, she said under her breath. That's not nothing. No, Maya agreed. It's not. Are you going to tell me what you're planning? Maya looked at her. I'm planning to tell the Admiral exactly what I found and let him decide what to do with it. Okafor studied her. And if he does nothing? Maya's answer was quiet and completely certain. Then I go to the people above him. A silence. And if there's pushback, real pushback. Chief Petty Officer, Maya said. I've had real pushback before. Something in the way she said it closed the conversation completely. Not coldly, there was no coldness in it. It was simply the statement of someone who has been through what the words implied and doesn't need to elaborate. Okafor nodded slowly. I'll be in early tomorrow, she said, in case you need anything before your 0800. Maya looked at her with something genuine. Thank you, Vanessa. It was the first time she'd used Okafor's first name. Okafor didn't say anything. She simply went back to her desk. At 1830, Maya was the last person left in the wing. She sat alone with her locked files open, working through the last strand of what she'd found. The piece she hadn't shared with Okafor yet. The piece that had been sitting in the back of her mind since that morning, like a splinter she couldn't quite reach. The 4 missing radio units. The relay interruptions. The inflated after-action reports that made operational failures look like acceptable outcomes. These were the visible parts. What she'd found at 1600 that afternoon was the part that wasn't visible. Buried in the supply chain cross-referencing in a set of secondary procurement files that connected to the primary records only through an obscure reference number she'd almost discarded as administrative noise was a pattern of external communications. Not internal base communications. Not the standard interwing relay traffic that moved through the base's encrypted system. Something else. A series of data transfers, small individually, collectively significant, routed through a commercial satellite relay provider that had a contract with the base for routine administrative overflow. Low traffic, low scrutiny. The kind of channel that nobody monitored closely because nobody thought anything important would move through it. Somebody had been moving information through it for 6 months. Maya stared at the transfer records for a long time. Then she picked up her phone, her personal device, not the base-issued one, and made a call. It rang twice. The voice that answered was male, middle-aged, and gave no greeting. "It's Maya," she said. A pause. Then, "How long?" 6 months minimum, possibly longer. Another pause. Longer. "Assets?" "I don't know yet. I need 48 hours. "You have 24, the voice said. "Then I'm sending a team." The call ended. Maya set the phone down. She sat very still for a moment. Then she opened her notebook, turned to a fresh page, and began writing in a shorthand that nobody on this base would recognize, because it wasn't a code that had been issued by any branch or division of the United States Navy. It was a system she had developed herself in the field over years of operations that her personnel file described as administrative. And the thing she was writing in that shorthand in that empty wing at the end of a 14-day posting that had just transformed into something considerably more serious was a list of every person on this base who might have had access to the commercial relay channel. The list was 8 names long. Derek Holt's name was on it. So was Jack Reynolds. She didn't sleep until after midnight. Not because she couldn't. Maya Collins had trained herself to sleep in conditions that would keep most people awake for days. She didn't sleep because there was work left to do, and the work required the kind of attention that couldn't share space with anything else. The 8 names. She went through them one by one, the way she'd been trained to go through a list when the stakes were real. Not looking for the most obvious answer, not looking for confirmation of what she already suspected, but looking for the thing that didn't fit. The detail that sat wrong. The gap between what the record showed and what the record should have shown. By 2300, she had eliminated 3 names. Junior officers whose access to the commercial relay channel was theoretical rather than operational. They had the clearance level, but not the familiarity with the system architecture that the data transfers required. Someone had routed information through a channel that most people on this base didn't even know existed. That required knowledge. Specific technical operational knowledge that didn't come from reading a manual. By 2330, she had a cleaner picture. 5 names remained. Holt, Reynolds, a senior communications technician named Warrant Officer Graves, a logistics officer named Lieutenant Commander Pham, who had been on base for 3 years and whose file was clean in the way that files were sometimes too clean, and a name she hadn't expected to see when she first pulled the relay access records, a name that had appeared only once in a single access log from 4 months ago, and had almost looked like a clerical error until she cross-referenced it against the personnel schedule for that day, and confirmed that the person in question had been exactly where the access log said they were. Admiral Walker's aide, Lieutenant Carver. Maya sat with that for a long time. Then she closed her files, locked her notebook in her bag, turned off the light, and walked to her quarters. She set her alarm for 0500. She had 2.5 hours before it would go off. She lay down and closed her eyes and did the thing she had learned to do in circumstances where the ground was unstable and the morning was going to require everything she had. She let the work go. Not permanently, not irrevocably. She set it down the way you set down something heavy when you need both hands free, knowing you'll pick it up again when the time comes. She was asleep in 4 minutes. Jack. At 0530, she was back at her desk. Okafor arrived at 0615 and found her already deep in a new set of files. She didn't ask what Maya was looking at. She made coffee, set a cup beside Maya's elbow without comment, and went to her own terminal. This was Maya recognized a form of loyalty that cost something. Okafor didn't know the full picture. She knew enough to understand that what was happening inside this wing was serious, and she had made the decision quietly, without drama, without negotiation, to stand on Maya's side of it. In an environment where the consequences of choosing the wrong side could end a career that was not a small thing. At 0715, Maya closed her laptop and looked at Okafor. "There's something I need to tell you before I go in to see Walker," she said. Okafor turned her chair. "Go ahead." "The problem is larger than I initially assessed." Okafor's expression didn't change. "How much larger?" "The missing equipment, the relay interruptions, the inflated after-action reports, those are symptoms. What's underneath them is an active information leak. Someone on this base has been routing data through the commercial satellite relay for approximately 6 months. Operational data. The kind that would give an outside party a detailed picture of base training schedules, communication protocols, and response capacity." The room was very quiet. "An outside party," Okafor said carefully. "I don't know who they're talking to yet. I know that the transfers are deliberate, consistent, and structured in a way that someone with technical knowledge designed to avoid detection." Okafor took a slow breath. "And Walker?" "Walker requested my efficiency reports yesterday. Either he already knows something, and he's trying to determine what I've found, or someone told him to look at my work, and that someone is on my list." "Carver," Okafor said. Maya looked at her. "His aide," Okafor continued. "He came in yesterday. He was the one who relayed the request." She paused. "He came back again at 1700. "I know." "Maya." Okafor's voice had dropped very low. "If Walker's aide is involved in this, if the Admiral himself is—" "I don't know that Walker is involved. I know Carver's name appears in an access log. Those are different things." "But you're walking into Walker's office in 45 minutes. "Yes." Okafor stared at her. "And you're still going?" "I'm still going," Maya said. "Because the alternative is to signal that I know something I shouldn't know to the person who may have sent Carver to me in the first place, before I have everything I need to end this cleanly." She paused. "I need Walker to show me who he is. The meeting is how I do that." Okafor looked at her for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly, not in disagreement, but in the manner of someone absorbing a level of operational calculation that she hadn't previously encountered in person. "What do you want me to do while you're in there?" she asked. Maya told her. Walker's office was what you expected from a man who had spent 40 years accumulating the evidence of his own significance. Not ostentatious Walker was too controlled for ostentation, but thoroughly documented. The photographs, the commendations, the unit citations, the handshakes with people whose names appeared in history books. The careful architecture of a career built by a man who understood that in institutions like this one, the story you told about yourself was almost as important as the things you actually did. Howe was already behind his desk when Carver showed Maya in. He stood, which was courteous, and gestured to the chair across from him, and waited until she was seated before he sat down again, which was the performance of a man who respected the forms of things. "Lieutenant Collins," he said, "thank you for coming." "Admiral Walker." High had the reports she'd sent his office on the desk in front of him printed, she noted, and annotated in pen. He had actually read them. Whatever Walker was, he was not a man who summoned people to meetings he hadn't prepared for. "These are remarkable," he said, and he meant it. The appreciation was genuine. "You built this cross-referencing framework in 2 weeks." "The framework itself, yes. The analysis took a few additional days. And you found these supply discrepancies independently, without being directed to look for them. I built a system that looked at everything together. The discrepancies weren't hidden from the system. They were hidden by the gaps between systems. None of the individual record sets showed the problem. Only the aggregate view did." Walker studied her. He had the eyes of a man who had been reading people for 4 decades and had developed a genuine skill for it. "You're describing the kind of analysis that takes years of operational experience to know to look for." "It takes knowing what concealment looks like," she said carefully. A slight pause. "Yes," he said. "It does." He folded his hands on the desk. "Lieutenant Collins, your file is interesting." "Sir, it's interesting because it's thorough without being particularly informative. Your postings are documented. Your performance reviews are consistently positive, but not in ways that distinguish you. Your classified rotation is well." He smiled slightly. "Classified. Maya said nothing. I made a call yesterday afternoon, Walker said, watching her face, to Naval Special Warfare Command. A general inquiry about your personnel record. The kind of call I'm authorized to make as a base commander reviewing the files of personnel under my command. Maya kept her expression completely neutral. The response I received, Walker continued, was unusual. In what way, sir? He looked at her directly. They told me that if Lieutenant Maya Collins was on my base, I should consider myself fortunate. And then they told me they couldn't tell me anything else. The room was quiet for a moment. That's a very particular kind of response, Walker said. I wouldn't know, sir. I'm not party to those conversations. No, he agreed. But you know what prompted it. He leaned forward slightly. Lieutenant Collins, I've been running naval installations for 19 years. I know what a standard personnel response sounds like. What I received yesterday was not that. He paused. So I'm going to ask you something directly, and I'd like you to answer me with the same directness. Sir? What are you actually doing on my base? The question sat between them. Maya looked at Walker. Really looked at him, the way she looked at things she needed to evaluate honestly. Okafor had called him political. A man who knew which way the wind was blowing. That was true. But there was something else in his face right now, something underneath the political calculation that she hadn't expected to find. He was worried, not about her. About something she represented, the arrival of a specific kind of attention that told him something was wrong on his base in a way that his own systems hadn't shown him. She made a decision. I'm doing my job, she said. Which is what I've been doing since I arrived. She paused. But I'd like to show you something if you're willing to look at it. He nodded once. She opened her bag and placed a single printed document on his desk. The commercial satellite relay transfer records, stripped of her analysis, showing only the raw data. Dates times data, volumes routing signatures. Walker looked at it. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something moved behind his eyes, a rapid, controlled processing that she recognized as the response of a man who had just seen something that rearranged other things he already knew. This came from the commercial overflow relay, he said. Yes, sir? How long? 6 months at minimum. Possibly longer, the earlier records are more fragmented. He was quiet for a moment. You found this in the supply chain cross-referencing. The relay transfers were connected to the equipment procurement trail. The same concealment methodology, using legitimate administrative channels to move things that shouldn't be moving. Walker sat back. He looked at the document for a long time without touching it. Then he looked at her. Who knows about this? Chief Petty Officer Okafor has partial information. She doesn't have the relay data. No one else? A beat. No, sir. He studied her. Is there something you're not telling me? Maya held his gaze. I want to know who's in that room with us, Admiral, before I tell you everything I know. It was the most direct thing she'd said to him. It landed exactly the way she'd intended it to land, as both honesty and a test. Walker's expression shifted. That's a remarkable thing to say to a flag officer. Yes, sir, I'm aware of that. You're suggesting that someone with access to my communications may be involved. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Walker looked at her for a very long moment. She could see him running his own calculations, the same kind of rapid multivariable assessment that she'd watched him apply to the relay document. He was deciding something. Not whether to trust her, that decision she thought he'd already made. He was deciding something about himself, about how he intended to respond to what was in front of him. My aide arranged your meeting, he said slowly. Lieutenant Carver, yes, sir. At my direction. I assumed so. He did not know the content of what I'd requested from your office. Maya waited. But he knew I'd requested it, Walker said, and he knew the timing. Something crystallized in her understanding. Not a new piece of information. Everything she'd found was already in her files. But the configuration of it shifted the way a lens shifts when you adjust the focus, and what had been approximate became precise. Admiral, she said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. He nodded. In the 48 hours before you requested my reports, did anything unusual happen? A communication you didn't expect. A request from someone inside this base that felt slightly off protocol. Walker's stillness was its own answer. Wednesday morning, he said. I received an informal communication from Commander Reynolds. He mentioned that a new transfer in the intelligence wing had generated some improved efficiency metrics and suggested I take a look. He paused. He characterized it as good news, a morale point, something positive to bring to the next senior staff review. Maya absorbed this. Reynolds had told Walker to look at her work. Reynolds, whose name was on her list. She kept her face exactly as it was. Did that communication come through your standard channel? Email, my official account. And Carver manages your official communications. The silence that followed was of a quality Maya recognized. The silence of a person who has just walked the path backward in their own mind and arrived somewhere they did not expect. Walk me through what you know, Walker said. His voice had changed. It was quieter, more careful, and considerably more serious than anything that had come before it. Maya took a breath, and then she told him everything. She was in Walker's office for 41 minutes. When she came out, Carver was at his desk in the anteroom. He looked up with the pleasant, practiced attentiveness of a man whose job required constant readiness and constant composure. Maya looked at him. She had in the previous 41 minutes told Admiral Walker everything she had found, including Carver's appearance in the relay access log. Walker had listened without interrupting, asked 3 precise questions, and reached for his phone at the end of her presentation, with the deliberate purpose of a man who had decided what to do and was doing it. The call he'd made was not to the base's internal legal officer. It was not to the Inspector General's liaison. It was to a number Maya recognized by prefix as belonging to Naval Criminal Investigative Service. He'd kept it brief. 4 sentences. The 4th one was, I need a team here by 1400. Now she stood in Carver's anteroom and looked at the young lieutenant, who might be the person who had started all of this, or might be a coincidence in an access log, and she gave him nothing. No tells, no hesitation, no warmth, and no coldness. Good morning, Lieutenant, she said pleasantly. Good morning, ma'am, he replied with equal pleasantness. She walked out. Okafor was at her desk when Maya returned to the wing. She looked up the moment Maya came through the door, a quick assessing look that asked 4 questions simultaneously without speaking any of them. Maya sat down. She angled her chair toward Okafor. Walker's calling NCIS, she said quietly. Okafor closed her eyes briefly. So it's that serious? Yes. How did he take it? Better than I expected. He's a man who doesn't like surprises, but he's also a man who knows how to process them quickly. She paused. He's concerned about the scope. He should be. And Carver? We don't know yet. Walker will handle that. Maya. Okafor stopped. Started again. Reynolds sent Walker to your reports. You know what that looks like. I know what it looks like, Maya said. I don't know what it means yet. Reynolds sending Walker to look at positive efficiency metrics is not inherently suspicious. It becomes suspicious in context. But context isn't evidence. You're protecting him, Okafor said. There was no accusation in it, just observation. I'm being precise, Maya said. There's a difference. Okafor was quiet for a moment. What do we do until 1400? Exactly what we've been doing, Maya said. Our jobs. It was at 10:20 that Reynolds came back through the wing. This time was different from all the previous times. Maya registered it the moment he came through the door, a quality to his movement that hadn't been there before. His stride was the same. His expression was controlled in the way it was always controlled. But there was something underneath it, a tension in the set of his shoulders, that she recognized as the physical manifestation of a man who had received information that changed his understanding of his situation. He came directly to her desk. Collins, he said. Commander. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the assessing hostility of their first 2 weeks. Not the performance of the apology. something more unguarded than either. Walker called me this morning, he said. Maya kept her expression easy. Sir, he told me that based on the efficiency reports you submitted, he's initiated an audit review of several base operational systems. He paused. He didn't give me details. He said it was a precautionary process. Another pause. He also told me that he'd spoken with you directly. He requested a meeting, Maya said. I attended. And he went to NCIS. She held his gaze. I wouldn't have information about Admiral Walker's communications, sir. Reynolds looked at her steadily. Someone I trust told me 20 minutes ago that a request went out to NCIS this morning from Walker's office, within an hour of your meeting. The someone he trusted was not on her 8-name list, which meant the information was traveling through channels she hadn't fully mapped. She filed that. Commander, she said, and her voice was measured and direct. If Admiral Walker has initiated a review, that's his decision to make, and his process to run. But you're connected to it. I submitted supply chain efficiency reports to his office at his request. Reynolds stared at her. She could see it happening, the recalibration, the slow reorientation of a man who had spent 2 weeks operating on an assumption about who she was and what she was capable of, and who was now incrementally and with visible resistance letting that assumption go. Who are you? He asked. It was almost identical to the question Holt had asked her 2 days ago. But where Holt's version had been probing and calculated, Reynolds was something rawer, genuinely searching. The question of a man who has suddenly realized he's been looking at something in the dark and has just turned a light on and found that the shape is nothing like what he thought. I'm Lieutenant Maya Collins, Operations Coordinator, she said. Assigned to this base 14 days ago. He shook his head slowly. That's not what I'm asking. I know, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his posture shifted. Not collapsed, not broken, but released. The way a person releases a grip they've been maintaining for so long that they've forgotten they're holding it. Is it Holt? He asked. And the question came out quiet and direct, and with a weight that told her everything about how much it cost him to ask it. Maya was still. I can't speak to an active review, Commander. Don't give me the official answer. His voice was very low. I need to know if it's my second in command. She looked at him. For a long, full moment, she looked at him, at the face of a man who had treated her badly and knew it, who had built his identity around a version of strength that had turned out to be too small, who was standing in front of her right now, not with his authority, or his history, or his 22 years, but with the raw, unglamorous vulnerability of someone asking a question they're afraid to have answered. I can't tell you that, she said finally. But I can tell you that what I found goes beyond personnel, beyond this wing, beyond your relationship with your second in command. She paused. And I can tell you that your name matters in this, Commander. It matters a great deal. What you do in the next few hours matters. He absorbed this. What should I do? He asked. And there was no demand in it, no authority. It was just a question. Stay visible, she said. Do your job. If anyone asks you about the audit review, you heard about it from Walker and you support it. Don't reach out to Holt. Don't change anything about your normal day. She held his gaze. And don't warn anyone. He studied her for a long moment. You're running this. I'm a lieutenant in the intelligence wing, sir. Maya. Her name in his mouth without rank was the first time he'd used it that way. Are you going to tell me at some point who you actually are? She looked at him. When this is over, she said. Yes. He nodded once. He straightened his shoulders. He turned and walked out of the wing, the same way he had walked in, with the same stride, the same controlled expression, the same surface. But the inside of the man had shifted. She had felt it happen. And in her experience, the inside was what ultimately mattered. At 11:50, Derek Holt called an unscheduled meeting of the wing's senior officers. Maya heard about it from Briggs, who appeared at her desk at 11:55, looking like a man who has just touched something and isn't sure what it is. Holt's calling everyone into the secondary conference room, he said. Senior staff only. He said it's about the training cycle review. When? Noon. Maya checked the time. 1200. NCIS wouldn't arrive until 1400 at the earliest. 2 hours. She thought very quickly. Who's included in senior staff for this meeting? She asked. The usual roster, wing officers, logistics comms. Briggs paused. You're not on the list. I didn't expect to be. He hesitated. Should I be worried? Maya looked at him carefully. Briggs was not on her list of 8. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a competent, decent petty officer who had been at this base long enough to read its dynamics, and who had from the very first day treated her with more honest respect than most people twice his rank. Darnell, she said, and using his first name made him look at her very directly. I need you to do something for me. Okay, he said. Immediate, no qualification. I need you to go to that meeting, sit in the back, don't say anything, just observe, and when it's over, I need you to come straight to me and tell me exactly what Holt said. He held her gaze. What's happening? I'll tell you when I can. Right now, I need eyes in that room. She paused. Can you do that? Yes, he said. No hesitation. Thank you. He left. Maya picked up her phone, her personal device, and sent a 3-word text to the number she'd called the night before. Timeline may compress. The response came back in 40 seconds. We're already here. Maya sat very still. They were already here. The team he'd mentioned, wherever they were positioned, whatever form they'd arrived in, they were already on or near this base. He'd sent them the moment she'd called him last night. Before the 24-hour window he'd given her. Before her conversation with Walker. Before any of this morning. Which meant he'd known from the first call that 48 hours was longer than they had. And he'd moved without telling her. She breathed through a moment of something that wasn't quite anger. She filed it. Later. Right now, Holt was in a room with every senior officer on this base, and she didn't know what he was saying. Briggs came back at 12:47. He closed the door of the secondary records room behind him and stood for a moment looking like a man who is processing something that has significantly expanded his understanding of the world he works in. Talk to me, Maya said. He called it a routine training review, Briggs said. But it wasn't. He spent the first 10 minutes going through standard metrics. Everyone knew it was cover for something else, but nobody said it. He paused. Then he started asking about audit protocols, specifically about what happens when an external audit is requested, what the standard notification procedures are, who gets informed, what timeline looks like. Maya's hands were still on her desk. And how did people respond? Most people gave him what he wanted. By the book answers. Nobody pushed back. Briggs stopped. Except Lieutenant Commander Pham. Maya looked up. What did Pham say? She said, and I'm pretty sure I'm getting this exactly right because it was so quiet in that room after she said it. She said, Commander, if there's an active audit in progress, asking about its procedures in a group meeting isn't something I'm comfortable with. The room was very quiet. And Holt? Maya asked. He said it was a hypothetical exercise, for training purposes. Briggs shook his head. Nobody believed him. But Pham was the only one who said anything. Maya absorbed this. Pham. The logistics officer whose name appeared on her list, whose file was too clean. Not because she was hiding something, building a clean record, with the deliberate intention of having standing when the moment came to use it. She'd been watching too. Darnell, Maya said. After the meeting, did Holt speak to anyone privately before he left the room? Briggs nodded. One person, the comms technician, Graves. Warrant Officer Graves, also on her list. How long? Maybe a minute. I couldn't hear what they said, but Graves left fast afterward, like he had somewhere to be. Maya checked the time. 12:49. She reached for her personal phone and typed a second message to the number she'd contacted twice now. Graves. Comms technician. Moving now. The response was immediate. Covered. She set the phone down. Briggs, she said. Yeah. I need you to go about the rest of your day exactly as normal. Lunch, your afternoon assignments, everything. Whatever happens in the next 2 hours, you don't know anything about it. You weren't involved. Understood. He looked at her steadily. And after the 2 hours? She held his gaze. Then it'll be over. He nodded. He reached for the door. Stopped. Collins, he said. Lieutenant Collins. Yes. I've been in the Navy for 9 years. I've worked for a lot of officers. He seemed to be choosing his words with genuine care. You're the best one I've seen. Maya looked at him for a moment. Thank you, Darnell. He left. She sat alone in the records room with the weight of everything converging and the particular clarity that came in her experience in the final hours before the thing that all the work had been building toward. Then she picked up her notebook, turned to the page with 8 names on it, and crossed off 2 of them. Not Pham, not Briggs. 6 remained. And somewhere outside this building, in a configuration she hadn't fully authorized and couldn't fully control, a team was in motion. She stood up, straightened her uniform, picked up her bag, and walked out of the records room. There was one more conversation she needed to have before 1400, and the person she needed to have it with had just made the worst mistake of his career. The person she needed to talk to was Lieutenant Commander Pham. Maya found her in the logistics corridor at 1303, walking fast with a folder pressed against her chest and the expression of someone who has just done something that scared her and is still processing whether it was the right call. It was. Maya fell into step beside her without announcement. Pham glanced sideways, didn't slow down. Lieutenant Collins. Lieutenant Commander. Maya kept her voice easy, her pace matching Pham's exactly. What you did in that meeting took courage. A beat. Pham kept walking. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Maya said. And so does Holt. Which means you need to understand something very quickly. Pham stopped. She turned and looked at Maya with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific conversation without knowing when it would arrive or who would start it. There was wariness in her face, and underneath the wariness, something that had been compressed for a long time and was very close to the surface. Who are you? Pham asked. Right now, I'm the person telling you that you're safe, Maya said. But I need to know something first. Pham's jaw tightened. Go ahead. How long have you known about the relay transfers? The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Pham exhaled a slow, controlled release that carried months of weight in it. 4 months, she said. I found an anomaly in the procurement audit I ran in March. I didn't know what I was looking at immediately. It took me 6 weeks to trace it back to the relay channel. She stopped. And then I didn't know who to tell. Because you didn't know who was involved. Because I didn't know how high it went. Her voice was very low. When someone is moving data out of a naval installation through a back channel for 6 months and nobody has caught it, that means either nobody is looking or the people who should be looking are the problem. So you stayed quiet. I stayed alive, Pham said with a flatness that had nothing dramatic in it. Just fact. Maya looked at her carefully. Did anyone approach you after you found the anomaly? Something moved in Pham's expression. Holt. About 3 months ago. He asked me in passing about the March audit, casual conversational, the kind of question that would sound like nothing if it was nothing. She paused. It wasn't nothing. He was checking whether I'd found it. I told him the audit was routine, nothing unusual. Another pause. He looked at me for about 5 seconds and then said, Good, keep it simple. And you understood what that meant. I understood that he knew I'd found something and was telling me to make a choice. Pham met her eyes directly. I've been making that choice every day for 3 months. What made today different? Maya asked. You, Pham said simply. You showed up 2 weeks ago and within a week the whole base was different. The tracking system, the efficiency reports. Walker suddenly reviewing things he hadn't reviewed in months. And the way Holt started watching you. She shook her head. I've seen people conduct investigations. I've never seen anyone conduct one the way you did, without anyone seeing it happen. Maya absorbed this. Your name is on a list, she said. An access log connected to the relay channel. Once. 4 months ago. Pham nodded slowly. I accessed the relay system records once to verify what I'd found. I didn't transfer anything. I didn't communicate anything. I just confirmed the channel existed and that it was being used. She paused. And then I backed out and never touched it again. That access log is going to be reviewed by NCIS, Maya said. They arrive at 1400. Something shifted in Fam's face. Not fear. Relief. The way a person looks when they've been holding something in the dark and someone finally turns a light on. I have documentation, Fam said. Everything I found. I've kept it in a personal encrypted file for 4 months. Her voice was steady. I was waiting for the right moment. Or the right person. Both just arrived, Maya said. I need that file. I'll have it to you in 20 minutes. 15, Maya said. We're running short on time. Fam nodded once and moved. The 15 minutes gave Maya enough time to do one more thing. She went back to the intelligence wing, sat at her desk, and pulled up the commercial relay transfer records one final time. She had been through them dozens of times at this point, but there was a detail she kept returning to, a pattern in the timing of the transfers that she hadn't fully resolved. The transfers happened on a consistent schedule Tuesday and Thursday evenings between 2000 and 2200 hours. Regular enough to be deliberate. Spaced enough to avoid triggering volume-based anomaly detection. And they had continued without interruption for 6 months. Until 10 days ago. The last transfer on record was from 8 days before Maya arrived. She had noticed this before and filed it as potentially significant. Now, running the timeline against everything she'd learned in the past hour, it resolved into something precise. They had stopped when they knew she was coming. Not when she arrived. Before she arrived. 8 days before her transfer was formally processed through standard channels. 8 days before her name appeared in any base record accessible through normal administrative access. Someone had known about her assignment before it was official. The only people who would have had that information at that point were Naval Special Warfare Command and the office that had arranged her transfer. She sat with the full weight of that for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her personal phone. The number she called this time was different from the one she'd been using. This one had a prefix she hadn't dialed in 8 months, and she'd hoped not to need it on this operation. It rang once. "Confirm location," the voice said. "Still inside," Maya said. "I need to know who knew my arrival date before the transfer was formally filed." A pause. "That's a sensitive question." "It's a necessary one. The relay transfers stopped 8 days before I arrived. Someone told them I was coming. That means the leak isn't just outbound data, it's the personnel pipeline." A longer pause. "We're aware," the voice said. Something cold moved through her. "You're aware. It's part of what you're there to confirm." "You didn't tell me." "We told you what you needed to get in cleanly. If you'd known the personnel pipeline was compromised, you would have moved differently. We needed you to move exactly the way you moved." Maya held the phone and said nothing for a moment. In those seconds, she ran through the precise architecture of how she'd been used, the specific calibration of information given and withheld, the way her genuine reactions and genuine methods had been deployed as instruments of an operation she'd only been partially briefed on. She had been a tool. A very particular kind of tool, the kind that only works when it doesn't know it's being used. "How much of this was constructed?" she asked. Her voice was controlled. "Your findings are real. The evidence is real. Nothing you discovered was planted." The voice was careful, precise. "You were pointed at a real problem, and you found it exactly the way we expected you to find it." And Carver. A beat. "Walker's aide has been under separate observation for 3 months. Your conversation with Walker this morning confirmed the access pattern we needed confirmed. He's not the primary. No, he's a relay point. The primary is someone you haven't named yet." Maya went still. "My list has 6 names on it." "5, the voice said. "You can eliminate one more." "Which one?" "Reynolds." She absorbed this. Evidence. His communications have been clean for 22 months. Every channel, every device. We've been watching him for longer than you've been watching Holt." A pause. Reynolds is a difficult man with a specific idea of what strength looks like. He is not a traitor. Something in Maya's chest released a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged she was carrying. She wasn't sure when Reynolds had moved from problem to concern in her internal accounting. Somewhere between the apology and the question he'd asked her this morning. The raw, unglamorous, genuine question of a man trying to understand a situation that had grown beyond his control. "Then who's the primary?" she asked. "That's what the next 2 hours are for." The call ended. Maya set the phone down. 5 names. Minus Reynolds. Minus Pham. 3. Holt. Graves. Carver. One of them was the primary. One of them had known her assignment date before it was filed. One of them had a connection that ran outside this base, outside standard naval channels, to wherever the outbound data had been going for 6 months. She had 90 minutes before NCIS arrived. She needed to find out which one. Pham delivered the encrypted file at exactly the 15-minute mark. She came to Maya's desk, sound, without being invited, and transferred the file from a personal drive to Maya's locked directory, with the precise, unhurried movements of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times in their head, and is finally, after 4 months, actually doing it. "Everything I found is in there," Pham said quietly, "including 3 things I didn't know how to interpret." "Walk me through them." "First, the relay transfers don't just contain operational data. There's a secondary data stream embedded in 2 of the transfer packets. I couldn't decrypt it. The encryption is above anything in our standard library." Maya looked at her. Above naval standard, significantly above. That narrowed things considerably. The encryption capacity required to embed a secondary stream at that level didn't come from a base communications workshop. It came from somewhere with serious technical infrastructure, which meant the outside party receiving these transfers was not a casual actor. "Second thing," Pham continued. 3 of the transfers coincide exactly with leave periods for a specific base personnel member. Not overlapping exact. The transfer happened within 2 hours of their departure from the base on each occasion. "Who?" Pham named him. "Graves." Maya filed it without expression. "And the third?" Pham hesitated. For the first time in the conversation, she looked uncertain, not afraid something more complicated. The expression of someone who is about to say something that will change things, and has been sitting with the weight of that change for a long time. "The third thing is a communication," Pham said. "A single email. It was routed through the commercial relay channel outbound about 4 months ago, but the addressing structure was different from the data transfers. It wasn't going to the same external destination." She paused. It was an internal communication, base server to base server. But it used the relay channel as a routing mechanism to make it look like external traffic when it was actually internal. Maya felt the particular alertness of someone whose pattern recognition has just locked onto something. "Where was it addressed?" Pham looked at her steadily. "Admiral Walker's private account." The room's ambient sound seemed to drop. "Walker received a communication through the relay channel," Maya said carefully. "Not received, sent." Pham's voice was very precise. The communication originated from inside the base and was routed through the relay to disguise its origin. When I traced it back, the originating IP addressed to an access terminal in the senior communications suite. A pause. "The communication was sent to Walker's private account. The content was encrypted. I couldn't read it." Maya sat very still. "You're telling me someone sent Walker a message through the relay channel to hide where it came from?" "Yes." 4 months ago?" "Yes." "Before Walker requested your March audit results?" Pham nodded slowly. "About 2 weeks before." Maya stared at the middle distance for 3 seconds. Then, everything she thought she understood about the architecture of this operation shifted by approximately 15 degrees, and the new configuration was considerably more disturbing than the one she'd been working with. Walker hadn't requested the audit because he was politically astute and felt the wind changing. He'd requested it because someone had told him something. In a way, designed to look like it came from nowhere. Someone had been managing Walker. And if Walker had been managed, if the communication that prompted the audit request had been engineered rather than organic, Then Walker wasn't the one holding the thread. Walker was the one being held. "Vanessa," she said. Okafor looked up from across the room. "I need Walker's call logs for the past 4 months. Every call he made or received on his official line. Can you get that through legitimate channels in the next 30 minutes? It'll require authorization. You have Walker's retroactive approval for audit support. Use it. That authorization covers supply chain records." "Use it anyway," Maya said. "And if anyone asks, it was a clerical extension of scope. I'll take responsibility." Okafor didn't argue. She turned to her terminal and started working. Maya turned back to Pham. "You've been sitting on this for 4 months," she said. "Every day knowing what was moving through that channel and not knowing who to tell." "Yes," Pham said. "That's a hard thing to carry." Something broke very slightly in Pham's composed expression. Not dramatically. A small, controlled fracture at the edge of it. "I have a family," she said. 2 kids. I didn't know how high this went. I didn't know if going to the wrong person meant—" She stopped. "I needed to know it was safe first." "It's safe now," Maya said. Pham looked at her. "How can you be sure?" Maya held her gaze. "Because the people I work for already know what's on this base, and they sent me here to document it, not discover it. The documentation protects everyone who's been doing the right thing." She paused. "Including you." Pham nodded. She pressed her lips together. She kept her composure completely. "Thank you," she said. Quiet and direct and genuine. "Thank you," Maya said. "What you did in that meeting this morning, naming what Holt was doing in front of a room full of people who were choosing not to name it, that mattered. That's on the record." At 1334, Okafor placed a printed summary on Maya's desk. "Walker's outgoing calls," she said quietly. "Flagged the ones outside standard operational contact lists." Maya scanned it. 3 calls in the past 4 months stood out. All 3 to the same number. All 3 made within 48 hours of significant base events: the March audit request, the January training exercise review, and the week Maya's transfer had been processed. The number had a Virginia area code. Maya wrote it in her notebook. She stared at it for a moment. Then she pulled up a classified directory she had access to through credentials that were not in her personnel file. The number matched a registered communications line for a defense contracting firm headquartered in Arlington. A firm that held logistics and communications infrastructure contracts with 6 naval installations along the eastern seaboard. A firm whose contract renewals had been approved consistently for the past 3 years, signed off at the installation level by the senior logistics officer at each base. Maya looked at the list of installations. Redstone was on it. The senior logistics officer at Redstone was Lieutenant Commander Pham. But Pham had been watching, not participating, which meant the approvals had happened before Pham took the posting. Or under pressure she hadn't been able to refuse. Maya pulled the contract approval records. 3 years ago, before Pham's posting, the Redstone contracts had been approved by a different officer. A name she recognized from the base directory. A name that was still on the base, still in a position of operational authority, still walking through the intelligence wing every morning like a man who owned the ground under his feet. The contract approvals bore the signature of Lieutenant Commander Derek Holt. 3 years ago, Holt had approved a series of infrastructure contracts with a firm that now appeared in Walker's private call records. A firm whose commercial relay channel had been used to move operational naval data to an unknown external destination for 6 months. A firm that had known Maya was arriving before her transfer was officially filed because someone with access to the contracting firm's internal channels had a source inside Naval Special Warfare Command's administrative pipeline. The picture was complete. Not every pixel, not every connection. But the architecture of it was there, the structure of how it had been built, who had built it, and how long it had been running. Holt had built this. Over 3 years. Methodically, patiently using legitimate infrastructure contracts as the framework and a commercial relay channel as the mechanism. He'd used Graves as his technical operator, the person with the skills to manage the encryption and the transfers. He'd managed Walker through the contracting firm's back channel, feeding the Admiral carefully calibrated information that kept him looking in the directions Holt wanted him looking. And when the efficiency anomalies started generating unwanted attention, he'd found a way to send Walker to Maya's reports using Reynolds, who had no idea he was being used as the messenger. Reynolds hadn't been part of it. He'd been a tool. A loud, visible territorial tool whose distrust of Maya had been useful cover for the quieter work happening around him. And Carver Walker's aide had not been a primary or even a significant participant. He'd been a convenience. A set of hands close to Walker's communications that someone had found a way to use for a single targeted task. Maya sat with all of this for exactly 60 seconds. Then she stood up, walked to the door of the intelligence wing, and looked down the corridor. Reynolds was at the far end, talking to one of his junior officers. He glanced in her direction without changing expression and without moving toward her. She gave him a single small nod. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he returned to his conversation. At 1:47, Holt came back through the wing. He was moving with purpose, the controlled, deliberate purpose of a man executing a plan. He went directly to the secondary communications alcove, the one closest to the external satellite relay interface, and he sat down at the terminal there. Maya watched from her desk. She did not move immediately. She watched him log in, watched his hands on the keyboard, watched the particular quality of focused urgency in the set of his shoulders. He was trying to access the relay channel. He was going to attempt one more transfer, or more likely a deletion. The removal of transfer records that he'd decided were now too exposed to leave in place. The standard last resort move of someone who has realized the net is closing and is trying to cut the most visible threads before it tightens. It wouldn't work. The relay records had been mirrored to an external archive the moment NCIS had been called through a process Walker had initiated from his office. Holt didn't know that, but Maya couldn't let him sit at that terminal long enough to understand what was and wasn't still accessible. Because the attempt itself, the login, the access request, the timestamp was evidence, and evidence needed to arrive intact. She stood up. She walked across the wing to the communications alcove. She stood in front of the terminal where Holt was sitting. He looked up, and in the half-second before his expression locked into neutral, she saw it, the precise, visceral moment of a person who realizes that the person standing in front of them knows everything. "Commander Holt," she said. "Lieutenant Collins." His voice was completely controlled. The voice of a man who has been managing his presentation for 3 years and is not going to stop now. "Step away from the terminal, please." A pause. "I'm conducting a routine communications check." "I know what you're conducting," she said. "Step away from the terminal." He looked at her for a long moment. The calculation was visible, not obviously, but to someone who knew what to look for. He was assessing his options, running the numbers, determining whether there was a version of this where he walked out of the wing and found enough running room to change the situation. "You don't have the authority to, Commander." Her voice was quiet and absolutely final. "The NCIS team lands in 11 minutes. The relay records have been externally archived since 10:45 this morning. There is nothing on that terminal that helps you." She held his gaze. "Step away." He stepped away. He stood up slowly, with the careful physical composure of a man who is determined that however this ends, it ends with his dignity intact. He straightened his uniform. He looked at her with an expression that had cycled through several things in the past 30 seconds and had arrived at something that was almost in its strange way composed. "How long have you known?" he asked. "The full picture this morning. The outline of it since day 4. Something moved in his face. "Day 4. The equipment authorization signature. February." She paused. "You were careful, but the cross-referencing created a view that the individual records didn't show." "The tracking system you built?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "You built that system specifically to find this." "I built that system to find whatever was there. This is what was there." He looked at her with an expression she hadn't expected. Not anger, not calculation, not the performed neutrality of a man managing his presentation. Something underneath all of that. The face of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just put it down, and the putting down is involuntary and unwelcome, and also in some exhausted and terrible way, a relief. "I didn't start this to hurt anyone," he said. "I know," Maya said. "The contracting firm offered resources that the base couldn't get through official channels. Better equipment, faster deployment, more reliable infrastructure. I thought—" He stopped. "You thought you were making things better," she said. "Not with sympathy, not with judgment. With the plain accuracy of someone stating what they see." "Yes." "And then it became something else." He said nothing. "Commander Holt." She was very still. "3 years ago, you signed a contract with a firm that has been transferring operational naval data to an external party for the past 6 months. The data includes training schedules, communication protocols, and base response capacity. Whatever you told yourself you were doing, what you actually did was give an outside actor a detailed operational picture of this installation." She paused. "I need to know who they are." Holt was quiet for a moment that stretched. "I don't know," he said. "That's not good enough. I mean, I genuinely don't know. I was the access point. The contracting firm handled the outside relationships. I never had direct contact with whoever they were moving information to." He met her eyes. "I knew it was going somewhere it shouldn't go. I told myself it was defense industry, research purposes, competitive intelligence." His jaw tightened. "I told myself a lot of things." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "You'll tell NCIS everything you just told me," she said. "And everything you know about the contracting firm's internal contacts. Every conversation, every name, every communication." "Yes," he said. The word came out stripped of everything except its plain meaning. "And Graves." Holt closed his eyes briefly. "Graves handled the technical side, the encryption, the transfer architecture. I recruited him 8 months ago. He understood what he was doing." "Did he know where it was going?" "He didn't ask. He's good at that, not asking." Maya filed all of it. "Sit down, Commander," she said. "Right here. Don't go anywhere. Don't contact anyone. Don't touch any device. When the NCIS team arrives, you'll speak to them directly and completely." He sat. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The relay records. What's in them?" "Everything," she said. He nodded slowly, like a man who expected that answer and needed to hear it anyway.
To come.
At 1358, Reynolds came into the wing. He stopped when he saw Holt sitting in the communications alcove with Maya standing near him. He took in the configuration, the precise, still quality of both of them. The closed terminal, the absence of normal movement and sound in the wing. He looked at Maya. She met his eyes and gave him one small nod. Reynolds' face went through something complicated and private. He looked at Holt, the man who had worked beside him for 3 years, who had been his reliable second-in-command, who had been in briefings and planning sessions and operational reviews and after-action debriefs beside him through more shared work than Reynolds could quickly count. Holt didn't look back at him. Reynolds looked at the floor for a moment. Then he straightened his shoulders and walked to where Maya stood. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Quiet and direct. The same question he'd asked her in the wing that morning, but different now. Less searching, more committed. "Stand by for the NCIS team," she said. "When they arrive, you'll be their point of contact for base facilities and personnel coordination. I need you to be the person who keeps this base functioning while they work. Can you tell me—" He stopped, started again. "Is it contained to Holt? Holt and Graves, and an external contracting firm whose identity NCIS will pursue?" Reynolds exhaled. A long, controlled breath that carried 3 years of not knowing in it, and now knew and was deciding in real time what to do with the knowing. "I recruited Holt to this posting," he said. "I know. I vouched for him. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. "That's on me, Commander." Maya's voice was steady. "You recommended someone you believed in based on a record that was deliberately managed to earn your confidence. What Holt did is on Holt. Your judgment of the person you thought he was is not the same thing as responsibility for who he turned out to be. Reynolds looked at her. The expression on his face was not comfortable. It was not resolved. It was the expression of a man who is going to carry something for a long time, and knows it, and is not going to pretend otherwise. "I misjudged you," he said, "from the first day." "Yes," she said simply. "I made it worse than it needed to be." "Yes." He held her gaze. "I poured a drink on your uniform in front of 30 people. "You did. And you." He stopped. "You already knew by then. About Holt. About the relay channel. About all of it." "I had the outline," she said. "Not everything." "And you said nothing." He shook his head slowly. "You let me—" He couldn't quite finish it. "I needed to understand what you were and weren't involved in," she said. "I couldn't do that if I told you what I knew. So you let me behave like an idiot. I let you behave like yourself," she said. Which turned out to be exactly what I needed. Something almost fractured in his expression. Not quite. He contained it, the long habit of a man who has kept himself contained through worse things than this. But the edge of it was visible. "Thank you," he said. "For I don't know what for exactly, for all of it." "Thank the system that sent me," she said. "I was just doing my job." "The system didn't do what you did," he said. "The system sent a person. You're the one who did this." Maya looked at him for a moment. Then, at 1400, exactly the sound of vehicles on the base exterior announced the arrival of the NCIS team and the wing, which had been holding itself at a particular sustained tension for the past 2 hours, began its shift into the next phase of what this day was becoming. Maya turned toward the door. "Collins," Reynolds said behind her. She looked back. "When this is over," he said, using her last name this time, with a weight and directness that was nothing like the way he'd used it 2 weeks ago. "I'd like to know who you actually are." She held his gaze. "When it's over," she said. "Yes." And she walked out to meet the team. The NCIS team was 4 people. They arrived in 2 unmarked vehicles, moving with the particular efficiency of people who have done this enough times that the doing of it no longer required any performance. The lead agent was a woman named Special Agent Diane Rourke, compact, methodical, with the kind of face that gave nothing away and asked everything. She had been in the building for approximately 90 seconds before she had assessed every person in the room, cataloged every exit, and identified Maya as the person she needed to talk to first. "Collins," she said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Rourke," Maya said. They had met once before 3 years ago in circumstances that neither of them would discuss in this room. The recognition between them was brief and professional, and carried the specific weight of 2 people who respect each other without needing to explain why. "Walk me through it," Rourke said. Maya walked her through it. She did it in 11 minutes, standing in the corridor outside the intelligence wing, with Rourke's team, listening and taking nothing down on paper, everything going into the recorder that Rourke wore, without drawing attention to it. Maya went through the evidence in the order she'd found it, not the order that made the most dramatic sense, because Rourke didn't need drama. She needed sequence and documentation, and the precise calibration of what was established fact versus strong inference. When Maya finished, Rourke was quiet for a moment. "The contracting firm's external contact," she said. "You said Holt claims he doesn't know who they are." "He claims the firm handled that relationship independently. I believe him not because he's credible in general, but because the architecture of what he built suggests someone who was compartmentalizing deliberately. He didn't want to know what was on the other side of the transfer." Plausible deniability. Or genuine insulation. Either way, the firm is the thread you pull. Rourke nodded once. "Graves." "In the base communications suite. He's been there since this morning. He hasn't left the building." Maya paused. "He knows something is happening. He hasn't tried to run." "Because running confirms it," Rourke said. "Because he's the kind of person who thinks staying still is the same thing as being invisible." Rourke looked at her with something that might have been the closest she came to a smile. "And Walker." Maya was careful here. Walker received communications through the relay channel that were designed to look like external traffic, but originated internally. He was being managed, not directing. But he's going to need to understand exactly how he was used, because right now, he thinks he's been running a base, and what he's actually been running is partially someone else's operation. That's going to be a difficult conversation. Walker is a man who knows how to have difficult conversations, Maya said. He's been having them for 40 years. He just hasn't had one about himself before. Rourke absorbed this. She looked at Maya steadily for a moment, with the evaluating directness of someone taking a final measurement. You found all of this in 16 days, she said. 14 working days, Maya said. The weekend didn't produce much. Rourke's mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile, but acknowledged the sentiment. All right, she said. We'll take it from here. I'll need you available for the next several hours. I'm not going anywhere, Maya said. The next several hours were the kind that look from the outside like nothing is happening and feel from the inside like everything is happening at once. Rourke's team worked with surgical precision. Graves was interviewed first quietly in a side room with one of Rourke's agents who had a particular skill for talking to technical people in ways that made them feel understood before they realized they were confessing. He lasted 40 minutes before he started talking. Once he started, he didn't stop. Holt was interviewed second. His account was consistent with what he'd told Maya in the communications alcove, detailed, chronological, and delivered with the drained composure of a man who has decided that the only remaining version of his integrity was honesty. He gave them names inside the contracting firm. He gave them dates and communication channels and the specific mechanism by which he had first been approached 3 years ago, when the offer had been framed not as espionage, but as a professional relationship that would benefit the base. He'd believed that framing for longer than he should have. When he stopped believing it, the structure he'd built had become too large to dismantle quietly, and he'd told himself that what had been set in motion was beyond stopping, and that managing it was better than exposing it. This was the lie that people in his position always told themselves, that the cost of the truth was higher than the cost of the silence. It was never true. The truth always cost less. But by the time you understood that the silence had already compounded into something very expensive, Rourke conducted the Walker interview personally. She went to his office at 15:30, and Maya was not in the room for it, but she was in the corridor outside when it ended at 16:48, and Walker emerged with the expression of a man who has just had the ground reorganized beneath him. He saw Maya immediately. He walked directly to her. "Lieutenant Collins," he said. "Admiral Walker." He looked at her with an expression she recognized, not quite what she'd seen on Reynolds' face, not quite what she'd seen on Holt's. Something specific to Walker. The expression of a man who has spent 40 years being the person who understood the situation and has just discovered that for a significant period of time he was the situation and someone else was understanding it. "I was managed," he said. "Yes, sir. The communications I received through the contracting firm's back channel, the ones I thought were industry intelligence, were curated specifically for you," Maya said, "to keep your attention oriented in directions that didn't create problems for what Holt was running." He was quiet for a moment. "And when you came in to see me this morning, you already knew." "I knew the outline. I needed to understand your role in it." "You were assessing me." "Yes, sir." Walker looked at her steadily. "And what did you conclude? That you were being used by someone who understood your patterns well enough to exploit them, and that you'd made a good faith decision to call NCIS the moment the picture became clear." She paused. "That's not nothing." He absorbed this. "I should have found this myself." "You were looking at what you were given to look at," Maya said. "That's how it works when it's done well. The person doing the managing doesn't hide everything. They just control what's visible." "You're being generous," he said. "I'm being accurate," she said. "Generous would be pretending there's no accountability review coming. There is. But the review will show what the evidence shows, which is that you moved correctly when the information reached you." Walker looked at her for a long, still moment. "Who are you?" he asked. Not with Reynolds' rawness. Not with Holt's calculating probe. with the genuine and respectful inquiry of a man who has just watched someone do something he knows he couldn't have done and wants to understand how it happened. Maya looked at him. "I'm the person they sent," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then I'm grateful they sent you, and not someone else." At 17:55, Rourke found Maya in the intelligence wing and sat down across from her desk. "The contracting firm," she said. "The Arlington number in Walker's call logs. We ran it while we were conducting interviews." Maya waited. "It's a shell," Rourke said. "3 layers deep. The registered address is a logistics consulting firm with 12 employees and a clean record. The parent company is registered in Delaware. The grandparent company." She paused. "The grandparent company has financial entanglements with a European defense contractor that has been on the State Department's watch list for 14 months. The room was very quiet. 14 months, Maya said. 14 months ago is when the data transfers from this base began increasing in frequency, Rourke said. Prior to that, the channel was active but at much lower volume. Someone got interested in what was moving through it around 14 months ago and started pulling harder. Which means the external actor escalated. Holt may have started this as a contracting relationship, but someone on the outside decided it was something more. Holt was a door, Rourke said. He thought he was the deal. He was the opening. Maya sat with this. The full scope of it settled into place with the particular weight of something that has been partially visible and is now fully revealed. A European defense contractor with State Department attention. A commercial relay channel running through a naval installation. Operational data training schedules, communication protocols, response capacity, moving outbound for 6 months at increasing volume. How much did they get? Maya asked. Rourke's expression gave the answer before her words did. Enough to be a problem. Not enough to be a catastrophe. The data was operational but not classified at the highest level. What they have is a detailed picture of this base's capacity and patterns, not access to anything strategic. A pause. But if they'd run this another 6 months, they would have had enough, Maya said. Yes. And they stopped when they found out I was coming. Rourke looked at her. About that. The source of the leak in the personnel pipeline. We've identified it. Maya waited. Administrative staff at Naval Special Warfare Command. A civilian contractor with access to transfer processing files. She's been flagged and will be interviewed tomorrow morning. Rourke's voice was even. She's not a primary. She was selling information about personnel movements to the contracting firm for 6 months. She didn't know what it was being used for. She knew enough to keep doing it, Maya said. Yes, Rourke said. She did. A silence. Is it contained? Maya asked. The leak is identified and closed. The external contractor is being escalated through state and their counterpart agencies in the relevant European jurisdictions. The base-level operation. Rourke made a small, precise gesture that encompassed the building around them. That's contained as of today, thanks to the work you did. Maya looked at her directly. I was briefed as though this was a supply chain anomaly investigation. Rourke met her eyes without flinching. You were. I was not told the personnel pipeline was compromised. I was not told there was an external actor with State Department relevance. I was not told your team was already in position when I made contact last night. No, Rourke said. You weren't. I'd like to understand the decision-making behind that. Rourke was quiet for a moment. You're owed that explanation, she said. And you'll get it. Not from me, from the people who made those calls. She paused. For what it's worth, the assessment was that full briefing would alter your behavior in ways that could have tipped the operation. Your genuine reactions, your genuine methods, your genuine unknowing, that was the asset. I know, Maya said. I worked it out. And Maya looked at her for a long moment. And I'm going to have a very direct conversation with the people who made that call, she said. After which I'll probably accept that the operational logic was sound, even if the experience of being the asset without knowing you're the asset is something I'd like to not repeat. Rourke held her gaze. That's a reasonable position. Yes, Maya said. It is. The base moved differently that evening. It wasn't visible in any single obvious way. No announcements, no formations, no public accounting of what had happened. The NCIS team worked through the late afternoon and into the early evening with the deliberate invisibility they were trained for, and the base's surface appeared almost normal to anyone who didn't know what was running beneath it. But the people who knew felt it. Petty Officer Briggs found Maya at 1800 in the secondary records room, where she was completing her final documentation package for Rourke's team. He knocked this time. She called him in. He sat down across from her with the expression of someone who has processed a significant amount of information over the course of a day and is arriving at the tail end of the processing with something that needed saying. It was Holt, he said. Yes. And Graves. Yes. He shook his head slowly, not dramatically. Just the genuine quiet disbelief of someone who has worked in the same building as two people for a significant period of time and is now recalibrating everything that shared space meant. I had lunch with Graves twice a week, he said. I know. He always complained about the coffee in the comms suite, said it tasted like the machine needed cleaning. A pause. I brought him a bag of his favorite once, Colombian blend. He said it was the best coffee he'd had in 2 years. He stopped. And the whole time he was running data out of this base to God knows who. Maya looked at him. People are complicated, Darnell. That's not complicated, he said. That's just wrong. Yes, she agreed. It is. I was quiet for a moment. What happens to them? That's for the legal process to determine, not me. But you have an opinion. I have a lot of opinions, Maya said. I try to keep them out of my work. He looked at her with the particular directness of a 9-year career that had taught him to recognize when someone was giving him the careful version of an answer instead of the real one. Collins, he said. Off the record, between us. She looked at him for a long moment. Holt made a mistake that grew into something he couldn't control, she said. And then he made the choice every day to keep it going rather than face what it had become. That's not a moment of weakness. That's a sustained decision. It deserves a sustained consequence. She paused. Graves knew exactly what the transfers were for from the moment he set up the encryption. He just didn't ask because not asking kept his hands technically clean. That's its own kind of choice. Briggs nodded. And the people outside this base, the contracting firm, whoever was on the other end of those transfers. That's a longer conversation, Maya said. One that isn't finished yet. He absorbed this. Is it done? He asked. Here is this base safe now. The leak is closed, she said. The people responsible are identified and in the process of being held accountable. The data that moved out has been assessed and the appropriate agencies have been notified. She met his eyes. Yes, it's done. He exhaled. A long, slow breath that had several weeks in it. Thank you, he said. He seemed to search for exactly the right thing. For doing it the way you did it, without blowing the whole place up. Maya looked at him. That's the job, she said. It's more than that, he said. And you know it. She held his gaze. She didn't argue. Go home, Darnell, she said. Get some sleep. He stood, moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. I've been in the Navy 9 years, he said, and I've never seen anything like what you did here. You'll see it again, she said. It just usually doesn't look like this from the inside. He nodded once, and he left. At 1900, Lieutenant Commander Pham came to find her. She wasn't carrying anything. She hadn't come to deliver a file or report a development. She simply appeared in the doorway of the records room with the expression of someone who needed to close a loop that had been open for 4 months. Maya gestured to the chair. Pham sat. She was quiet for a moment, gathering something. NCIS interviewed me at 1600, she said. I know. They have my file, the documentation I kept. Good. They told me my cooperation and the quality of the documentation I preserved is going to be relevant. She stopped. That's the word they used. Relevant. It will be more than relevant, Maya said. What you preserved is the kind of contemporaneous evidence that prosecutions are built on. You documented it in real time with dates and annotations without prompting from anyone. That's significant. Pham was quiet for a moment. I was terrified, she said. For 4 months, every day I woke up and thought about what I'd found, and whether today was the day I should say something, and whether saying something would... She stopped. I have 2 kids, she said again. The same thing she'd said in the hallway that morning, but different now. Less like a justification, and more like something she was setting down. You protected your family, Maya said. And you preserved the evidence. Both things are true. I should have come forward sooner. You came forward when you found someone you could trust, Maya said. In an environment where trust was the resource in shortest supply. That's not a failure. That's how you survive something like this. Pham looked at her with the expression of someone receiving something they need and aren't sure they've earned. You figured it out without me. I would have gotten there, Maya said honestly. But your documentation filled in pieces that would have taken me another several days to establish independently. And the time that matters here isn't my timeline, it's how long that relay channel ran. You shortened that by what you preserved. Pham was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? She asked. For you, a formal witness designation, a period of cooperation with the investigation, and then when it's concluded, a record that shows you did the right thing in a situation where doing the right thing was genuinely difficult. Maya paused. The contracting firm's approval chain will be reviewed. Your signature on the renewals will be examined. The record will show that you identified the problem and preserved evidence rather than participating in the concealment. That matters. It matters enormously, Maya said. Pham nodded slowly. Lieutenant Collins, she said. Maya, she said. At this point. Something softened in Pham's face. Maya. She paused. I'm glad it was you. I'm glad they sent someone who... I'm glad it wasn't someone who just came in and burned everything down. The burning down approach has its place, Maya said. This wasn't the place for it. How do you know? Pham asked. Genuine curiosity. How do you know which approach to use? It seems like... She searched for the words. It seems like a very fine line. Maya thought about this with genuine attention. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. You look at what you want to be true at the end, she said. Not just who's held accountable, that part is necessary, but it's not the whole thing. You look at what the people who did the right thing get to carry afterward. What the institution looks like when it's over. Whether the people who were being managed without their knowledge can stand up straight again. She paused. Burning it down gets the bad actors, but sometimes it takes the rest of the place with it, and the rest of the place has people like you in it, people like Briggs, people like Okafor. She met Pham's eyes. They're worth protecting too. Pham looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood, and something in her posture was different from the way she'd been carrying herself for 4 months lighter. Not in the sense of lightness that ignores weight, but in the sense of a weight that has been acknowledged and shared, and is therefore no longer carried entirely alone. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you, Maya said. The conversation with Reynolds happened at 20:30. He found her in the intelligence wing, the only 2 people left in it. The rest of the base having moved into the particular suspended quiet of an evening that everyone knows is different from the evenings before it, without being able to say exactly why. He sat down across from her desk, without being invited, and without asking which was new, not aggressive, but different in quality from the way he'd occupied space in this room before. He sat the way a man sits when he's been standing inside a performance for a long time and has finally stopped performing. Rourke debriefed me at 1900, he said. How was that? It was clear, he said. She's very clear, the kind of person who doesn't leave any ambiguity about what they're telling you. He paused. She told me you found the supply chain anomaly on day 3. Day 3, Maya confirmed. And you've been building it since then. Building and assessing, she said. There's a difference. He looked at her steadily. She also told me that your cooperation with the base efficiency audit was the mechanism that got NCIS on site today. That without the cover of your work, they couldn't have moved this quickly. The cover helped, Maya said. It wasn't the whole thing. What was the whole thing? She looked at him. 14 days of watching a base that had a problem, and the people who had either caused the problem or were living inside it. Building a picture that was accurate enough to stand up in an investigation. She paused. And finding the people who'd been doing the right thing and protecting them well enough that they could still stand when it was over. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Fam, he said. Fam knew for 4 months. She preserved everything. She was the most important thing I found on this base, and I didn't find her until 2 hours before NCIS arrived. She came to your meeting this morning, the way she pushed back on Holt. Showed me who she was, Maya said. Yes. Reynolds looked at the surface of the desk between them. He seemed to be finding words for something he'd been carrying through the afternoon and evening. I spent the first 2 weeks of your posting treating you like a problem, he said. And the entire time you were solving the actual problem. A problem I should have found. A problem that was running under my command for 3 years. Reynolds, she said. He looked up. Holt was selected, managed, and deployed specifically because he knew how to operate close to people like you without triggering your instincts. He was good at his cover. Better than good. He'd been practicing it for 3 years, and he had professional support in maintaining it. She held his gaze. What happened on this base is not a failure of your vigilance. It's evidence that the people running the operation were skilled. That's a generous interpretation. It's the accurate one. The same operation at 5 other naval installations with experienced commanding officers who were trained and attentive, and none of them caught it either. She paused. I caught it because I was sent here specifically to catch it, with information and methods that your command structure doesn't have access to. That's not a reflection on your ability. That's just what this kind of work requires. He was quiet for a long moment. You could have told me sooner, he said. At some point, you could have brought me in. I needed to know if you were part of it, she said. I couldn't tell you what I was doing until I knew that. And when did you know? When you came to me this morning and told me that Walker had called you, she said. Reynolds could have used that call as cover, gone straight to Holt, or Graves warned them, given them the few hours they needed to close the channel and clean the surface evidence. Instead, you came to me and asked me what to do. She met his eyes. That told me who you were. Reynolds absorbed this. I asked you what to do, he said slowly. And you knew then? Yes, because someone who was involved would have made a move, not asked for guidance. Because someone who was involved would have already had a plan, she said. You came to me because you didn't have one. That was the answer. He looked at her with something she hadn't seen from him before. Not admiration. Exactly. Not gratitude. Exactly. Something between them that was specific to the experience of being seen accurately by someone, and finding unexpectedly that the accuracy was not a threat, but a relief. I misjudged you from the first day, he said. I made it difficult. I made it. He stopped, took a different angle. The thing in the lounge. What I did. It's done, she said. It's not done, he said quietly. I poured a drink on a Navy SEAL in front of 30 people because she was quiet and efficient and made me feel like my version of strength was being questioned. He paused. I'd like to understand how you didn't, how you just sat there and... Because I had more important things to do, she said simply. He stared at her. That's it, she said. There was no discipline involved, no restraint, no choosing the higher ground. I had a job that required everything I had, and your ego was the least important thing in the room. A pause. It still is. Something broke in Reynolds' expression, a contained private break, the kind that doesn't involve tears or dramatic gesture, just the quiet fracture of a particular self-image that has been maintained for a long time. Yeah, he said. I know. You're a good officer, Maya said, and she meant it exactly as precisely as she said it, not warmly, not coldly, but with the honest weight of someone who has assessed a thing carefully and is stating the result. You've spent 22 years building genuine competence and genuine commitment. What you did in this building today when it counted was right. You didn't panic. You didn't protect yourself. You asked what the mission needed, and you did it. She held his gaze. That matters. I was quiet for a long time. Will you tell me now, he said finally, who you are? Maya looked at him. My name is Maya Collins, she said. I hold a commission as a lieutenant in the United States Navy Operations Coordination. That's the accurate answer to that question. He waited. The other answer, she said, is that I've spent 11 years doing work that doesn't appear in accessible personnel files, in service of objectives that don't appear in standard operational records, using methods that this base doesn't have institutional knowledge of and doesn't need to. She paused. I was sent here because what was happening on this base required a particular kind of attention, the kind that can only work when it doesn't look like what it is. A Navy SEAL, among other things, she said. The SEAL training was the foundation. What came after it is the part that the records don't reflect. Reynolds stared at her for a long moment, processing it not just the information, but the full weight of what it meant. The woman he'd mocked in front of 30 people. The woman he'd poured a drink on. The woman who had sat in that lounge and absorbed his performance of dominance with a stillness that, now that he understood it, had nothing to do with tolerance, and everything to do with the particular calm of someone who has been in rooms where the cost of the wrong reaction was not embarrassment. I owe you an apology that's going to take me a long time to properly construct, he said. You don't owe me anything, she said. The apology you gave me 2 days ago was sufficient. What happened in the lounge is not the measure of you. What you did today is. You're being generous again. I'm being done with the subject, she said. Not harshly. Just with the finality of someone who has moved on and is stating that fact. He nodded. They sat together in the quiet wing for a moment, the strange quiet of two people who have been through something significant in a short time and are arriving at the other side of it and finding that the other side feels different from what the inside felt like. Where do you go from here? He asked. That's not something I can tell you. Of course. A pause. Will you? He stopped. Is there a next time, another base? Another situation like this? There's always a next situation, she said. Whether it's like this one depends on what the mission requires. He nodded slowly. And the people who send you? Yes. They're lucky, he said, to have someone like you. Maya looked at him. I'm lucky to do work that matters, she said. Most people don't get that, regardless of how the work looks from the outside. She paused. So are you, Reynolds. Most of your career you've done work that mattered. Don't let this one episode rewrite the whole of it. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stood. He straightened his uniform, the gesture of a man recomposing himself, not as a performance, but as a real act of self-recovery. Safe travels, Lieutenant Collins, he said. Safe command, Commander Reynolds, she said. He left. Her orders came through at 2200. She read them on her personal device, committed the relevant details to memory, and deleted the message. Then she packed her bag, the same single standard-issue bag she'd arrived with, and her leather-bound notebook, and she sat on the edge of her bunk for a few minutes, in the same way she'd sat on it 16 days ago on her first night. Different now, though. The room was the same. The bag was the same. The notebook was filled in ways it hadn't been when she arrived. She thought about Briggs, who would come in tomorrow morning and find her desk empty. She thought about Okafor, who had made a choice within the first 2 days to trust someone she didn't know, based on nothing more than the quality of the work and the character she read in the person doing it. She thought about Pham, who had carried 4 months of terrible knowledge in careful silence, and would now have to carry the aftermath. The investigation, the testimony, the long, slow process of an institution recalibrating itself around what it had discovered. She thought about Reynolds, the man who had poured a drink on her uniform, and the man who had asked her this morning what she needed him to do. She was not certain those were two different men. She thought, in fact, that they were the same man, one who had never been tested in exactly this way before, and who had, when the test arrived, been more than what his worst moment suggested. She had learned over 11 years of work that didn't appear in accessible files that the distance between a person's worst moment and their best one was not always large. That the people who could move quickly from one to the other were often more trustworthy than the people who had never been tested at all. The untested ones didn't know what they were yet. Reynolds knew now. She picked up her bag. She picked up her notebook. She walked out of the room, down the corridor, through the main building, and out into the open air of the base. At the main gate she stopped. Okafor was there. It was past 2200. Okafor had no operational reason to be at the main gate at this hour. She was there because she had known Maya was leaving and had decided to come. They stood facing each other. "I would have appreciated more warning," Okafor said. "I know," Maya said. "I'm sorry." "You're not sorry," Okafor said. "But I appreciate you saying it." A pause. "This base is going to be different now," Okafor said. "The investigation, the restructuring, the all of it. It's going to take time." "Yes," Maya said. "But it'll be honest time. That's worth something." Okafor looked at her steadily. "Will I see you again?" "Probably not," Maya said. "The way this works, probably not." Okafor nodded. She had expected that answer. The expecting it didn't make it easier, but she was not a woman who required ease. "You changed this base," she said. "Whatever happens in the investigation, whatever the restructuring looks like, you came in here and found what nobody else could find, and protected the people who deserved protecting, and held accountable the people who deserved to be held accountable." A pause. "That's rare." "You helped," Maya said. "From day 2. You made a judgment call and it was the right one. Remember that." Okafor straightened. "Safe travels, Lieutenant Collins." "Safe post, Chief Petty Officer Okafor." Maya walked through the gate. She didn't look back. Not because she didn't feel the weight of what she was leaving. She felt it exactly as much as it deserved to be felt, the 16 days, the people in them, the work done, and the work that others would now continue. She felt all of that, and she carried it with her through the gate and past it and into the night beyond. She didn't look back because she had learned over 11 years of doors like this one that looking back was not how you honored the work. You honored it by moving forward. By arriving at the next place with everything you'd learned in the last one, and applying it cleanly without sentiment, without residue, without the weight of every previous door slowing you down at the next threshold. The car was waiting where she'd been told it would be. The driver said nothing. She got in, set her bag on the seat beside her, and opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top of the page, she wrote the date. Beneath it, she wrote 2 words. Next assignment. Then she clicked her pen closed, looked out the window at the base retreating behind her, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel the full weight of what the last 16 days had been. Then she turned forward. The woman they had underestimated was already thinking about the next door. Already cataloging what she knew and what she'd need to learn, and what the work would require from her when she arrived somewhere new, and sat down at a desk that nobody thought was important, and began quietly and without announcement to read. Because that was who she was. Not the SEAL training, not the classified file, not the 11 years of work that didn't appear in accessible records. Those were the tools. Who she was at the center of it was a person who showed up and paid attention and did what the situation required without needing anyone to know she was doing it. The base had needed something specific. She had provided it. The people who deserved protection were protected. The people who deserved accountability were accountable. The institution that had been compromised was now, for the first time in 3 years, actually secure. That was the job. She had done it. And the woman who had walked into Naval Base Redstone 16 days ago as a quiet lieutenant with a plain file and a leather-bound notebook walked out of it, having changed every significant thing that needed changing, without raising her voice, without announcing herself, without needing a single person to understand what she was until the moment the work required them to know. The most dangerous people in the world were never the loudest ones. They were the ones who stayed calm, paid attention, and were already 3 steps ahead by the time anyone thought to look.